It is the evening of May 16th, 1302, and in the city of Bruges, the newly arrived French garrison is being treated to a feast by the royal governor, Jacques de Chatillon. Chatillon has hosted King Philippe IV himself just a year earlier, and the costs of the royal visit, along with the expense of the 2,000-man garrison, are being borne by an increasingly angry and resentful Flemish populace. Unbeknownst to the celebrating French, plans are afoot to strike a blow in return for the humiliations imposed on Bruges and the county of Flanders. When the French and their local collaborators finally fall to bed in the early hours, their bellies full of wine, the resistance moves into action. The guards at the barrack houses and official residences are overwhelmed, and the sleeping officials, captains of the army, and even private soldiers have their throats ripped open by the rebel Hoedendag, heavy wooden clubs topped with vicious spikes. By the early summer dawn, the insurgents are sprinting through the streets, calling out the oath, shield and friend, a phrase impossible for a Frenchman to repeat without giving away his origin. Those who are revealed are immediately struck down in a torrent of stabbing. Jacques de Chatillon dons the habit of a priest and picks his way through the back streets. His boots cloy with the gore and blood that runs freely over the cobbles. Throughout the morning, the slaughter continues. By noon, Jacques de Chatillon is en route to the royal court of Philippe. Fast riders dispatched already far ahead of him bear the news that hundreds of his royal appointees lie dead. When it comes to the outcome, rulers on both sides have much to lose. Defeated royalty was no stranger to imprisonment, execution, or having their kingdoms and riches dissolved before their eyes. That includes the plundering of their priceless collections of medieval and classical art, worth as much as a small kingdom today, thanks to their value increasing over time. That appreciation is something HistoryMarche subscribers have been able to easily take advantage of, even investing in multi-million-dollar art collections themselves. Thanks to our longtime sponsor, Masterworks art investing platform. Masterworks handles all the legwork when it comes to art collecting and investing, from authentication and acquisition to storage and sale. All you do is invest in a piece of artwork you like, and once the painting is sold, potential net proceeds from the sale get distributed to the investors. Masterworks has sold 23 pieces to date, from artists like Banksy, Warhol, and most recently an $8 million Basquiat painting, even with the recent dip in the art market. Masterworks investors have realized annualized net returns like plus 17.6%, plus 17.8%, and plus 21.5% from assets held for 1 year, and with paintings ranging from $500,000 to $20 million. Shares of some paintings have sometimes sold out in minutes. But since so many HistoryMarche subscribers have signed on in the past, you can still skip the waitlist and start investing today with the QR code on screen, the link in the description, or at masterworks.art/HistoryMarche. Past performance is not indicative of future returns. Investing involves risk. See important regulation A disclosures at masterworks.com/CD. News of the Bruges massacre sends a concussive pulse through Europe. Philippe, the combative and expansive French king, is keen to pay off his debts to the Templar Order and Jewish financiers, and the wealth of Flanders is vital to that end. Thus, the king cannot allow such an insult to pass without a powerful and demonstrative response. Philippe, having only recently departed Flanders, will not lead the army himself. Instead, he entrusts command of his forces to Robert II, Count of Artois. Artois has already bested a Flemish army at Ferns in 1297, and he is seen as a capable and formidable military commander. He plants his standard at Arras, and from there, the French army assembles in great force. The army is dominated by its nobility. Aside from Artois himself, he is joined by Raoul, Lord of Clermont and Constable of France, who arrives with a force alongside his brother Guy of Clermont and Simon de Moulon, both marshals of France, the latter also being a celebrated crusader. Pierre Flotte, Chancellor and Keeper of the Seals, keeps his own tent, alongside the Counts of Aumale, Demartin, Eu, and the sons of the Counts of Holland and Soissons. The Viscount of Lille, a Flemish supporter of the king, as well as the Viscounts of Tournai, Beaumont and Blosseville, man their own contingents. Godfrey of Brabant, Lord of Ascot and Viersen, and his son John are just two more of this profusion of France's elite, all of them keen to prove their mettle against the rebels of Flanders and display their martial prowess. So many notables are present that no one chronicler can name them all. When Artois gives the order for the army to march to Lille, the display is magnificent beyond words. Aside from a force of knights, squires and men-at-arms, probably 3,000 strong, the French army also has a large contingent of 1,000 crossbowmen, under the command of Jean de Berlas, Seneschal of Guyenne, 1,000 pikemen and 3,500 light infantry, making for a total force of between 8,000 and 9,000. The Flemish army that is mustering at Bruges is an altogether different affair. It is primarily composed of thousands of ordinary citizens who will form infantry units with a minority of just a few hundred mounted men-at-arms and almost no nobility. This peasant character is encapsulated by the presence in the leadership of Peter de Koninck, a Bruges weaver who was among the ringleaders in the night slaughter of the French occupiers. Some nobles do return in the aftermath of the uprising to lead the Flemish forces, notably William of Jülich and brothers Guy and John of Namur. In the preceding years, Flanders has been reliant on the English monarchy, and Edward I Longshanks led an expeditionary force to support Flanders in its rebellion 5 years earlier. But the English king is now forced to remain in the north of his own realm to deal with the uprisings of the Scots, led by William Wallace and Robert the Bruce. The relationship between the English and the Flemish is one of the main drivers of the wish for independence from France. The county of Flanders enjoys a monopoly on English wool, and its weaving industry has made it richer and more attractive as a source of tax than less developed regions of the French kingdom. These close ties with London also make it a target for French repression whenever conflict with England arises, as it does frequently over English holdings in Gascony and Aquitaine. All of Flanders rises in the aftermath of the expulsion of the French, excluding the town of Ghent. But even then, more than 700 men from that city arrive under the command of Jan Borluut to aid in the coming battles. From Bruges, William of Jülich and Peter de Koninck leave on May 31st and put Wijnendal under siege with a portion of their force, and move on to Histel, arriving there on 1st of June. They liberate Newport the next day, and then 4 days later Hoenshote and St. Winiksbergen on the 6th. All of the French forces and Flemish collaborators have thus far fled before them, with the exception of those in Wijnendal, and it seems for a time that this pattern would repeat at Kassel on the 9th of June, but the fortress there holds out, and the two leaders are forced to put it to siege. Guy of Namur is following them with a separate force, completing the seizure of Wijnendal and then proceeding to Ypres, which he liberates on the 14th of June. It is while there that he learns of the continued resistance of the fortress of Kortrijk, and recognizing the value of its position and defenses, he moves to place it under siege. While en route, he messages William of Jülich and Peter de Koninck to join their forces with his. He arrives at Kortrijk in the last week of the month and is quickly joined by Borluut and the Genters, 500 men from Ypres under the command of Jan van Renesse, and finally William of Jülich and Peter de Koninck on the 26th. The united Flemish army now begin to make their preparations for the French army they know is moving to crush their campaign and wreak terrible revenge for the killing of their comrades. As the Flemish army assembles before the fortress at Kortrijk, they see that it is situated south of the river Lane and surrounded by a moat, the Lache Pfeiffer. To the east, the Groeninge stream runs north and west into the river and moat, forming a square around the eastern field. Two of the main roads allowing access to the country of Flanders run through this plain, the road to Ghent and that to Oudenaarde. Control of these will be needed for a French army to maintain control over Flanders, and this fact makes battle an inevitability. It is here that the Flemish army forms itself. Though it is high summer and the weather is fine, the numerous rivers and streams render the terrain soggy, and there are numerous ditches dug for drainage. Naturally, the Flemish begin augmenting these existing obstacles with trenches of their own to better incapacitate the imminent French cavalry. They camouflage and conceal these as best they can to surprise any incoming cavalry force. Canny French observers in Kortrijk and their commander, the Viscount of Lens, watch the Flemings work. They see that while the peasant army might lack the mounted power and aristocratic ostentation of French heavy cavalry, the wealth of their merchant cities means that they are very well equipped, with each man supplied with helmet, padded doublet, mail coverings, and iron gloves. Their weapons are made to a very high standard, and the urban militias from which they are drawn are known to train and drill relentlessly, making for a very disciplined force of between 8,000 and 10,000 men. At Lens on the 30th of June, Artois learns of the presence of the combined Flemish army and immediately moves to engage it. On the 1st of July, his main army is at Souclan, south of Lille, and the next day reaches Marquette. Progress here is stalled for a week while the army works to make the ditches that traverse the countryside passable, and it was only on the 8th of July that the French army comes into sight of the Flemish. Seeing the outlay of the land, Artois acts quickly from his camp on Pottelberg Hill. He orders an immediate attack on the Tournai Gate. This urgency is forced upon him, for he must attempt to reach the undersupplied and dwindling garrison of Kortrijk. But the hastily mounted action fails to achieve a breakthrough. Despite the persistent aggressiveness of Artois' men, the attack eventually breaks against stiff Flemish resistance. Meanwhile, not far from the Lille Gate, a second attack is launched the next day. Trusting the superiority of his troops, the undeterred Count believes that the Flemish will offer most resistance early on. Probing them repeatedly will wear them down. But the men near the Lille Gate hold firm. Once more, Artois' cavalry and supporting troops are rebuffed with losses. That night, Artois holds a council of war in which he and his captains go over their options. Aware that the terrain and superior position of the Flemish army will hamper any general offensive, he is also conscious that their command of the two roads makes simply bypassing the position a futile effort. The French army will be in hostile territory with no hope of resupply from their own country if it does not give battle. Two of his commanders give opposing tactics for engaging the enemy. Jean de Bourlade wishes to use his crossbowmen and skirmishers to launch the attack, pushing the Flemish line back from the brooks and streams that enclose their position, and sheltering the cavalry for its crossing. Godfrey de Brabant advises Artois to make a mock deployment so that the Flemish will have to form battle stations and then leave them to stand in the sun for the day, exhausting and demoralizing the peasants to an extent that they will not wish to fight the day after. But the bulk of Artois' council prefers the option of a direct, all-out attack the following morning. For even though the Flemings outnumber the French in gross numbers, the French army is made up in the far greater part by heavy cavalry, which the captains are in no doubt will ride roughshod over the commoner infantrymen. The volume of France's most elite noblemen calling for the attack is enough for Artois to fall in with them as the Council of War concludes. But sometime during the night, he is given a signal by the impatient Viscount de Lance from within the walls. The French garrison walk with torches up and down the walls of Kortrijk to catch the attention of their comrades, and then through the torches at a depressed area where the Hrunina stream meets that of the river. When the early morning light comes, the soldiers on the walls point with their swords to the same spot, their blades glinting in the sun. This is the point where Artois should direct his attack to lift the siege. It is enough for the French general, who orders a general deployment at 6 a.m. The trumpets call the men on Pottelberg Hill to order. They quickly don their armor before hearing mass and taking a light breakfast. This feverish activity is noted by the Flemish, who similarly begin coming to order, dismantling tents and putting on their own armor. While the French army divides into 10 battalions, Artois sends Guy of Clermont and Simon de Moulon to scout and survey the Flemish order of battle. They report to him that the Flemings are lined up behind a marshy waterway, with the river at their rear, making any kind of outflanking or envelopment impossible. The scouting party also notes the lack of noble banners among the Flemish lines. Guy of Namur is prominent, as is that of Jan van Renesse, whose banner is emblazoned with a ferocious lion. They conclude that the great majority of the Flemish army is made up of urban tradesmen and rural peasants. Artois is unimpressed. By now, more than 3,000 horses are among the French lines, and he proclaims it unthinkable that they will lose to such people. The Flemish army and its leaders are also aware of the stakes of the situation. With rivers and waterways surrounding them, a retreat in the event of defeat would be impossible. This stiffens the resolve of the men to fight to the last. William of Jülich commands the men of Bruges on the right wing behind the Great Brook, a stream that comes off the Hrunina, while men from the Bruxelles and West Flanders are behind the confluence of these two streams at the centre. Guy of Namur commands the Flemish left wing, shielded by the Hrunina monastery, leading men from Aalst, Oudenaarde, Kortrijk, and the independent Ghent contingent. Jan van Renesse is positioned behind the main central formation with a reserve corps, while to his right, the contingent from Ypres form a rear guard in the case of attack from the French garrison in Kortrijk. The Flemish army is arrayed in a crescent formation, and their commanders keep them back from the banks of the streams so as to be out of missile range, but also close enough to take advantage of any crossing in force by the enemy. These have a long wait through the morning, while the 10 French battalions stand across from them. Jean de Bourlade commands the central battle, with perhaps 1,400 knights and thousands of infantry, drawn from the faraway regions of southern France, Navarre, Lombardy, and Iberia. 8 other battles are placed either side of him, with the 10th unit forming a larger mixed cavalry and infantry rear guard. It is Borla's crossbowmen who make the initial foray into action when the sun is at its zenith. The Flemish commanders extol their men to fight hard, stand their ground, and take no prisoners. While the crossbowmen advance, the men of Bruges are reminded that should the French be victorious, they and all their loved ones will be destroyed in the reprisals that follow. Just before the first volleys of bolts cross the stream's banks, the Flemings tell their men to keep their minds on the fight until the battle is done, and forget all thoughts of booty and plunder. Flemish crossbow units advance to deter those of the French from crossing the streams and claiming the ground, and a smarting exchange arises between the two sides. Lines of French knights advance behind the crossbowmen and continue when the Flemish units begin to fall back under the weight of numbers. Artois waits until his crossbowmen have reached the banks of the Hrunina and the Great Brook, and then he orders them back and out of the way. The men who have opened the way for the French cavalry are given little time to avoid the resulting forward march, for the order to the cavalry to advance comes almost instantaneously. Artois is now committed to the offensive. He must overwhelm the commoner army, for fully 7 of the 10 French battalions move forward, 4 on the left wing and 3 on the right. Most of the crossbow units manage to either pass through the mounted battalions or else move around to the flanks, but the advance is so quick that a considerable number are run down by their own comrades or else pitched into the stream. The Flemings are forced to watch as the knights cross the streams, albeit with difficulty, and their commanders again remind them to stand firm. Some horses refuse to make the jump and must be cajoled or pulled forward. Other knights fall from the saddle into the water. The Flemings set traps by covering trenches and brooks to make them invisible to the limited sight of the mounted knights. These catch more than a few of the French unawares on the far side, but the great majority can form up for the offensive. Flemish archers begin firing at distance, their comrades watching the swirling banners and startling heraldry of the noble equestrians on the French line. The French left wing coalesces successfully, followed by the right, and finally the centre. Any hope the Flemish archers had of holding off and breaking the cavalry attack fades when the French begin an immediate charge. They ride full tilt toward the men of Bruges on the right wing. Not to be outdone, Borla and the centre follow suit, and then finally the French right wing. Flemish archers and crossbowmen fire their final volleys. They then break and run to the rear of the infantry line. The ground shakes under the weight of the cavalry charge. The French hold their lances under arm, war cries going up on both sides. The din of trumpets and drums reaches a crescendo underneath the pounding of the hooves. And then, contact. The French knights swing their weapons, aiming their blows through the thin slit of their visors. The Flemish infantry closes ranks, trying to recall their practice and drill. But the difference between the training ground and the reality of fighting thousands of French knights is like night and day. Exhortations to God rise over the noise in their thousands, as the field is rent with screams and the noise of ripping flesh. The Flemish line holds, first on the right and then in the centre. The men of Bruges, Bruxelles and West Flanders hold their places, gloved iron fingers raising the pikes planted into the ground like vices. The cavalry, unable to stop their push, impales itself upon this forest of spears, the horses crying out in agony when their chests are pierced. The knights bray in despair when they are knocked from the saddle and beaten down with the hoedendag. Flemish whip out daggers to stab into the eyes behind the visors and hamstring the suffering horses. The French riders behind the front line continue to tread over their fallen countrymen, putting more pressure on those at the front. Many of the knights dismount and fight by hand, wading through the planted pikes and swinging their swords at Flemings in range. Now at a disadvantage against the more heavily armoured and better equipped advancing knights, the Flemish side loses its initiative and begins to waver. Meanwhile, the French right wing makes its impact with the Flemish left in much the same manner, though its units are closer together than the wild charges of the left and centre. The East Flemings hold their ground here too, but the knights follow the same pattern, rushing up over the broken first line, overwhelming the ranks of defenders, then dismounting and bearing down on them on foot. Robert of Artois crosses the brooks with the remaining battalions and French reserve and watches the unfolding battle. Two smaller units remain on the other side as a rear guard with the French baggage train. In the centre of the fighting, Godfrey of Brabant manages to fight his way to William of Jülich and bring him down, besmirching his banner in the process. But he is eventually overwhelmed by Flemish guards, who manage to wrench Jülich to safety and kill Brabant in the process. His son and heir John is also killed in the fighting. At around this time, a fire is noticed burning within the town, and this serves as a distraction for Jean de Lance to attempt a breakout from the town's fortress. The Ypres contingent engages, and another hand-to-hand fight breaks out in the streets of the town. Even with the rear attack contained, the Flemish line is still suffering, and an implosion seems imminent. Some units break and disengage from the fighting. The French sense their advantage and press harder with the attack. Jan van Renesse orders the Flemish reserve forward. Its impact is immediate. The French lines begin to fall back, beaten by the longer Flemish pikes and clubbed by the hoedendag. Flemish numbers are now brought to bear, with so many of the French cavalry fallen or otherwise incapacitated. Artois knows that there is no retreat for the French army back across the streams. At this critical moment, he brings his own reserve forward to shore up the lines. He chooses the East Flemings on the left under Guy of Namur as his target. Trumpets and thundering hooves signal his approach. Viewing this as the portion of the Flemish army that lost some of its battle order, Artois hits it with another heavy charge. The fatigued Flemings attempt to hold as they had in the initial attack, but Artois' fresh riders, combined with their leader's presence amongst their ranks, drive deep into the defenders' line and trigger a partial rout. Artois fights as far as the Flemish banner, coming so close that he can grasp the flag in his fist and partially render it. But at the very same moment, a Flemish fighter named Willem van Saftinger attacks his horse, and Artois is dropped to the ground. Grievously injured, the French commander is killed. The French rear guard on the far side of the river dithered on whether to advance, eventually choosing to stay where it is, likely as it had been given the task of guarding the baggage train. Further up the field, and without extra support and the presence of its leader, Artois' battalions flounder, and the Flemish retake the advantage. Word of Artois' death is soon traversing the battlefield, and with renewed vigour, the Flemings push back the now exhausted and broken battalions of French knights. As in accordance with the orders prior to the battle, little or no quarter is given. Very quickly, the entire French army collapses and its battalions disintegrate. Those who cannot flee are summarily executed. Others scramble across the streams and away to the south. The Flemish, meanwhile, pursue them all the way, crossing the streams themselves and making to attack the remaining units and the French infantry with the baggage train. Although they had been attempting to shield the baggage train as it makes a withdrawal, the surviving French units see it as a lost cause when near 10,000 Flemish fighters pour over the banks and make straight for them. They flee. Incredibly, the Flemings have lost only perhaps 300 to 400 men over the course of 3 hours. French losses are in the thousands, and most crucially, these have come from the elite of the leadership and its nobility. The Flemish keep up the pursuit through the countryside. The next couple of days see horrific acts committed against the French troops. Those who make it out do not halt until they reach Tournai and Lille, arriving with so little that they have to sell their equipment for food. So great was the victory of the peasant army over the apparently invincible mounted French nobility that other, smaller states like Scotland and Portugal took careful note of the tactics employed for wars with their larger neighbours. In Flanders itself, the riches seized on the battlefield gave the battle its classical moniker, the Battle of the Golden Spurs. The French garrison of Kortrijk surrendered 2 days after the defeat, and on the 14th of July, John of Nemours took possession of Ghent. It and Ypres were brought under the control of the new regime. While France was shocked and shaken by the appalling defeat, the court of Philippe IV had no intention of allowing the catastrophe of Kortrijk to be the end of the matter. New plans were afoot and new companies formed throughout the kingdom. Though it had created a victory for the ages, Flanders was not free yet. If you like what you see, consider supporting my work on Patreon, and you get ad-free early access to my videos for as little as $1. You can also show your support by liking the video, commenting, and subscribing to my channel as a sacrifice to the algorithm. As always, I'll see you in the next one.